Well, it's an exciting fight card. I'm excited to watch the Saturday. There's also the Kumite, which is an amazing jiu-jitsu event. I'm going to have both events streaming side by side while I nerd out with some board games probably. But that all being said, what I'm most excited for right now is our favorite segment on the show, Fights, Dogs, and Parlays. Gumby, before we get into it, one may wonder if any company sponsors this week's edition of Fights, Dogs, and Parlays.
Absolutely. This episode of Fights, Dogs, and Parlays is brought to you by My Bookie. Visit mybookie.ag for the best bookie experience you can find online. They've got a 50% free bet option no matter what your deposit size is to start. Plus, they have quick 48-hour payouts, which is absolutely phenomenal. You want to make sure that you get that payout as quick as possible. They got it for you. Plus, they accept cryptocurrency, and they've got a phenomenal mobile setup because, sometimes you get on your phone, you're trying to do some live betting. The mobile absolutely sucks. Not with MyBookie. Check it all out, mybookie.ag.
Wow, My Bookie, bringing you Fights, Dogs, and Parlays. Talk about a match made in heaven. Talk about a symbiotic relationship. We call this synergy in the corporate world. I love it because I love gambling, but not in an addictive way. Okay, let's get it going. Obviously, we're going to start. Jorge Masvidal is stepping in on late notice, 6 days to be exact, to take on the champion, Kamaru Usman. Usman, of course, was supposed to fight jiu-jitsu phenom and surging MMA fighter Gilbert Burns. Very different matchup for Usman. He is, of course, a minus 300 favorite in most books. Masvidal, you could get betting off as a plus 260. Now, Masvidal is one of the UFC's most popular fighters, coming off his big win over Nate Diaz at MSG, the BMF title. The Rock presented it. Of course, he had the Ben Askren highlight reel, knee to the head knockout that was replayed everywhere, has been seen over 1 billion times. But is that enough to topple the dominant wrestling machine, and no slouch on his feet either, Kamaru Usman? Who you got?
I'm going with Kamaru Usman, and to be honest with you, I'm looking at this negative 300 odds, and I said to you off the air, I would be as comfortable with Usman at odds as high as maybe negative 375. I think he is a clear-cut favorite in this fight for a lot of reasons. If you look back at Jorge Masvidal's record as he goes back in time, he does very poorly against wrestlers. He gets taken down fairly easily. I actually picked Ben Askren to beat him, and I stand by the idea that if that fight allowed Ben Askren to start working on some of his wrestling, we might not have this whole Street Jesus phenomenon and this baddest motherfucker phenomenon. I think, there was a high probability that he could have looked pretty bad grappling there in that match with Askren. And there's evidence all over of it. If you look back at his fight with Ross Pearson, he went 0-2 trying to defend takedowns from Ross Pearson, a guy we know largely is like a British boxer, right? Like, not so much, his wrestling doesn't come into play hardly at all. So, like, for somebody like Ross Pearson, and granted that was 3.5 years ago, to have taken him down that many times, you're now putting him in there with maybe the greatest wrestler in that division, right? Like, he's a guy who, beat up Colby Covington on the feet. He's a guy who took down Tyron Woodley, who is previously, impossible to take down. I just think Kamaru Usman's style is a absolute nightmare for Jorge Masvidal, who, if he can force him to box, definitely has a chance here. I just don't imagine that he can force him to box.
I laid it out on our Twitter. What were the paths to victory for Masvidal? Interested to hear what you think they are, or if you agree with what I laid out. And, of course, you can follow us at Top Turtle MMA on Twitter. One would be some sort of strategic game planning a la Ben Askren. When Usman bends down for a takedown, he times it well with a knee. You get a highlight reel knockout. Something out of left field, almost, something like that. Option 2 was just drag it into deep waters, take it into the 5th round, tied 2-2, defend a takedown, outpoint Usman essentially on the judges' cards. And then option 3, try to engage Usman in a firefight. Maybe utilize the clinch if you feel, if Masvidal felt that he could be dominant out of the clinch, make it a dogfight, get Usman to overextend himself, and then unleash a 3-piece combo and a soda lights out for Usman. I find that to be the most far-fetched. But what do you think of those three paths to victory, and do you see anything else?
I think likely the best path to victory for him is for Usman to get tired. If he has to keep working for takedowns and Masvidal manages to get back up, I think that's probably where he has the best chance, because Masvidal has power in his hands even late into fights, and we all know wrestling to be one of the most tiring things. So I think that's probably his best game plan. I can't imagine him winning a decision against Usman. I know you outlined that as one of the possibilities. You got to remember, Usman has a style that plays well to judges, right? Leaning against the guy in the cage, getting any amount of top game in a round, sometimes steals rounds even probably when it shouldn't. So for that reason, and that's part of the reason why I like Usman, even if the odds were to get even wider, is because his style just plays well the decision. So that almost takes a whole level out of Masvidal's game, and we're looking at, he's going to need a big knockout. So I just don't see him landing that big knockout on Usman.
I agree with you. The only thing, and again, this is what we do, we beat things up here at Fights, Dogs, and Parlays, just trying to wrap my head around a Masvidal victory. The only other thing I could really point to, and I think we're both on it, I mean, this is Usman's fight all day, especially when you bring in the takedowns to this. The only other thing I could point to is Masvidal is not a fun opponent to take on 6 days' notice. You think about some short notice fights that have happened. You think about Ferguson agreeing to fight Gaethje on short notice and how that turned out for Ferguson after he was getting ready for Khabib. And I know that's not a perfect analogy because those game plans were so widely different.
I think they're pretty widely different in this one too, though, right? I don't think
true.
He wanted to take Gilbert Burns down. I wouldn't want to take Gilbert Burns down. Gilbert Burns is an ace on the ground, and we saw he didn't want to take Demi and Maia down, so why would he want to take Gilbert Burns down? So I actually think you're right. I think this is a big switch, not maybe as drastic as Tony Ferguson's, but I think close to it. You are going from a guy who you probably don't want to take down to a guy you almost undoubtedly want to get down as quickly as possible. It's a big switch, so I will give you that.
But I guess true, and I think what I was really trying to outline, though, is that it's a big switch that probably plays to Usman's advantage, whereas it didn't play to Tony's advantage. And then going back even further than that, again, just I'm thinking of short notice off the top of my head, even Khabib preparing for 7 different opponents, Tony, Max Holloway, and ending with Al Iaquinta, and then you have Al Iaquinta stealing a round off him in the fourth. Probably the best round anyone's fought against Khabib in 5 years. So that was, maybe too close to really for comfort for Khabib, taking it on short notice. And then, of course, you have Nate Diaz stepping up against Conor on short notice instead of RDA. So sometimes, MMA is wild. We're going to Fight Island. Usman took it on 6 days. You just never know. All right, let's move on. Alex Volkanovski is a minus 225 favorite. He's the champ. He dethroned Max Holloway last year. Holloway coming in as a plus 185 dog. I guess the question becomes, did Holloway see enough things in the first fight that he can now try to expose, or is this going to be another razor thin? Even if some people don't find that fight razor thin, I think, a lot of people had it 4-1 Volkanovski, some 3-2. But do you see or do you feel that Holloway can do enough to get his title back here?
I don't. And part of the reason is the growth and change we see in Alex Volkanovski fight to fight. If you look, that dude is absolutely positively making wild changes in game plans and in skill sets fight to fight. If you saw him before he fought Aldo and then the fight that he did against Aldo, it's completely different. Against Chad Mendes, he didn't want to be pressed against the cage the whole time. He wanted to land his strikes from distance. Aldo, he's got to do the exact opposite, and he adapts so well. So I actually expect him to be able to make adjustments better than Holloway, and I expect this to be a wider fight when it comes to how we see it judged. This is going to be a more clear-cut victory, in my opinion, for Alex Volkanovski because, like I said, not that Max Holloway doesn't learn from his fights, but if you look at the difference between him fight to fight and Volkanovski fight to fight, you will find one of them adapts far better than the other.
Yeah, I think this is something we've touched upon in over our 200 episodes in doing this. Is sometimes it's not so much even about the age of each fighter, but more so about where they are in their arc of their evolution of being an MMA fighter. And I think you're right in that I don't think Max Holloway is going to come out and, I mean, watch me eat my words now. I don't think we're going to see a brand new Max Holloway. I think Max Holloway is Max Holloway at this point. And that's one of the other problems with being, a dominant force at the top of a division, a guy who reeled off, 11 mostly high profile wins in a row and then, dethroning Jose Aldo twice. Everyone and their mother is now in their basement studying film, trying to figure out how to solve your Rubik's Cube. And that's exactly what Volkanovski was able to do and come in. And he hasn't even shown his full progression as an MMA fighter yet. I don't think we've seen peak Volkanovski yet. And let's also not forget, Volkanovski is a nightmare when he gets on top of you and can just ground and pound you to death. It's more of a modern ground and pound, not so much from like guard, let's say, but if he gets on top of you in side control, he's very almost Habib-like if you watch some of his early fights in the UFC in that regard. And he did not have a wrestling background, he had a rugby background, which is LOL. But my point being, we still have more to see in Volkanovski's evolution, and that's actually, I would even say, scary.
Yeah, I 100% agree on that, and I think that's the reason we clearly go with Volkanovski here.
But that being said, it's not. I still, laying a bet on Max at 185 isn't the worst thing someone could do.
It's
because
not
Max
the worst
Holloway
thing.
is.
Yeah, it's not the worst thing somebody can do, but like, is in a firefight, if he is getting the best in the exchanges, I just have a tough time believing he doesn't get pushed against the cage until he loses a decision. Or until he gasses, or until Volkanovski's superior cardio, and I'm not knocking Max's cardio, but Volkanovski's superior cardio takes over there, right? Like, and it's not like he can bully Volk either, right? Like, if Volk wants to put him in the clinch, and Volk wants to put him against the cage, he will. And that's an out for Volkanovski at any point in time.
I want to keep arguing with you, but you're making a really good point, so I'm not gonna. It's Volkanovski's fight, but let's see if the once great champion can maybe have, a better night than Volkanovski, and then we get an amazing trilogy. All right, let's move on. Gumby, you told me off air how to say Peter Yan's name for real. What is it? Petro Yan?
Piotr.
Piotr Yan. He's a minus 235 favorite. He's facing Jose Aldo, a plus 195 dog. Who you taking here?
You're laughing. This is the hardest of the three title fights for me to pick. I'm going to be really honest about that. A lot of people out here just knocking Jose Aldo and Jose Aldo's potential here. But let's look at who the toughest person Piotr Yan has beat since coming to the UFC. The toughest person he's beat since coming to the UFC, in my opinion, is Jimmy Rivera. So, Jimmy Rivera, freaking phenomenal fighter, right? But Jimmy Rivera went to a 3-round decision with Piotr Yan. And in that fight, the judges gave one of the rounds to Jimmy Rivera. We're talking about a 2-1 win over Jimmy Rivera. And meanwhile, with Jose Aldo, we have a guy who came down to the bantamweight division for the first time. Everybody talking about how he looks like Skeletor. And he went and arguably maybe beat the number one contender in the division. And don't get me wrong, I think he wildly does not deserve this title shot. I think he absolutely, positively does not belong in this fight. It belongs to Aljamain Sterling. But I also really worry about what his leg kicks and what his kicks in general do to somebody like Piotr Yan, who sits down on his punches. If you asked me 3 weeks ago to tell you who I had winning this fight, I was livid that Aldo was getting the fight, and I would give it right away to Piotr Yan. But the more and more I look at film in this fight, and the more and more I think about how Yan has kind of got an unproven record, almost plus 200 for Jose Aldo, whether or not I'm picking him straight up, gun to my head, my life depends on it. I might not be picking him then, but at plus 195, almost plus 200 at mybookie.ag, you 100% want to bet on Jose Aldo if you're betting on this fight.
Very interesting. I'm taking my boy Jan, but you make some good points about the odds being what they are. Speaking of odds, let's get to our underdog of the week. It's Davey Grant, plus 150 over Martin Day. Why?
Yeah, and I'll give you a quick shout out too. Last event in the Apex, we also hit our underdog of the week, which is Kama Worthy, who picked up a plus 200 submission victory over Violent Bob Ross. So maybe listen to us on our underdog picks. I like Davey Grant mostly because Martin Day has been away for 2 years. You know, that is a long time between your UFC debut and your second UFC fight. And in that fight, he got tagged on his feet and looked like he had no idea what to do when he was on his back against Ping Yuan Li. So given the fact that he struggled off of his back and is going to be fighting a guy who has phenomenal submission skills, you know, it's a pretty clear path to victory there. If he can get him down, I think it's clearly Davey Grant's fight, and he might lock up the submission pretty quickly. If he can't get him down, I think it's Martin Day's fight. So basically, you're asking yourself, does Davey Grant get Martin Day down, and is it worth plus 150 money? And I definitely think it is.
Get your calculators out, and let's do a little arithmetic together. Don't worry, I'll do it for you. Our parlay to play this week is Leonardo Santos, a minus 190, and then Carol Rosa, a minus 230. So taking two favorites, parlaying them together, and get yourself plus 120 odds.
Yeah, well, first of all, let's talk about Leonardo Santos, because I think maybe he's the most underrated fighter on the UFC roster. Do you know he's undefeated in 7 fights in the UFC, including wins over Kevin Lee and Anthony Rocco Martin? Like, that is...
Could have put a gun to my head, didn't know that.
Yeah, that is an incredible resume. He's undefeated in 7 fights, 6-0-1, 1 draw. The problem is that it's over an 8-year span. He's got 7 fights in 8 years, about to have 8 fights in 8 years. And injuries or canceled fights or whatever it was that caused him to have these long layoffs, it certainly, you know, has taken a little bit of the luster away. But he came back in 2019 at 39 years old and knocked Stevie Ray cold. And Stevie Ray is a hell of a fighter. And then they turn around and they give him a newcomer, a UFC newcomer in Roman Bogatov, who's got some wrestling but also is very hittable. So we're taking a guy with good jiu-jitsu skills and a big, powerful hands against a wrestler who's hittable. I think it's a no-brainer here for Leonardo dos Santos. And then we got Carol Rosa. Carol Rosa is 1-0 in the UFC. She looked good in her debut. Her hands are quick. She got good leg kicks. She's fighting Vanessa Nello, who's 0-2 and has shown me almost nothing in her 2 fights. So, you know, at negative 230, I think that's a slam dunk. She'd probably be a bigger favorite if people knew more about her skills. And putting them together and getting plus money, I think is the easiest money you can make on this card.
Boom. Well, that's our version of Fights, Dogs, and Parlays, and we're sticking to it. Please hit us up on our Twitter. We'll be tweeting during the show. Also follow us on IG. Let us know if we did you dirty here. We understand gambling advice. But I'll tell you what, we don't give bad gambling advice, so all you're going to be doing is hitting us up on our social media and saying thank you. Thank you so much for Fights, Dogs, and Parlays. You guys are the best.